So welcome to Tabby's Book Boxes. This is my channel. This is where I post informational videos that can support readers as they're working through the books I include in my subscription boxes. So even if you haven't gotten a subscription box through me, you can still watch this video. But if you have gotten a subscription box through me, this is a really good resource because I'll have this video, which you can watch before, gives you information about the life of the author. And then I'll have another one for after you finish reading that can go through some of the themes, discussions that you may have missed. And it gives us more space in the comments, talk about things that we noticed or liked or didn't like about the book as we were reading. Let's talk about the life of Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston was born in 1891, but that's not what she says in her memoir. In her memoir, Hurston writes that she was born in 1901, and it wasn't until recently that scholars found out she was actually fictionalizing her life. But she does that all the time in her memoir, Dust Trucks on the Road. She uses language and discusses things in a way that makes it seem like her life is a little bit different than it is, a little bit more magical, a little bit more in line with folklore and there's this grand story behind her. And that makes sense because Hurston, as she got older, was an anthropologist. She was a folklorist. She collected stories. And so when she thinks about her past and her life as a story, we shouldn't be surprised if not everything she writes in her memoir is true. So Valerie Boyd wrote a biography of Zora Neale Hurston called Wrapped in Rainbows. It's an award-winning biography. If you want more resources, it's really good. And it covers a lot of Hurston's life in a really, really sensitive way. In her biography, she writes that there was never quite enough for Zora Neale Hurston in the world she grew up in. So she made up for whatever she needed. For example, when she writes that the two neighboring towns around her, Black Eatonville and White Maitland, were living side by side for 55 years without a single instance of enmity. I just don't believe her. I don't believe that what she's saying is true to reality. That post-Civil War Florida could have no examples of racism. I just don't think that's possible. But Zora Neale Hurston was creating a story around her life. She was creating a mythology, almost. And this idea that she could have come from a place of harmony, of peace, and of self-leadership and self-governance for the Black community, I think was really important to her. Hurston's parents came from two different social spheres. Lucy Ann Potts, her mother, was from a really wealthy family. Her father had acres of land. He was a really successful farmer, and he kept his family really well. Zora Neale Hurston's father, John Hurston, was less affluent. He was from the bad side of town. He came from a poor family, but he was ambitious, and so he began attending the rich Black people's church, and that is where he met Lucy. He was 21 at the time, and she was 16. We're not going to get into that, but obviously we don't like that today. They were different in class, right? John Hurston was from a lower class than Lucy Potts. But John was very attractive. He was big, he was strong, and he was also light-skinned, which worked as a social currency. Back then, and sometimes even now. There were rumors that he was actually the bastard son of a very wealthy white man in the town. And so, he got a lot of flack for that, but he also got more respect, more admiration from women because he was light-skinned. And Zora Neale Hurston writes about her mother. She writes about someone who was persevering and hopeful. And when she writes about her father, she writes about someone who was charismatic, unfaithful, right? But generally wanted to do the right. And that's something I love about Hurston's writing, is the way that she sees nuance in people. I think sometimes it's hardest for us to see nuance in the people who are closest to us, like our parents, right? Or our friends, or even like ourselves. Like, the further away someone is, the easier it is to be like, oh, but people are complicated. But Hurston has this gift of being able to see nuance and complexity in everyone. And it makes her writing really beautiful. After Hurston left Eatonville, she went to Howard University, where she got her associate's degree. She set up an award-winning school newspaper, and just generally was very, very involved in the student body. So involved, in fact, that she was offered a scholarship to Barnard College, which is the women's college that's associated with Columbia. She was the first Black woman to attend. She attended on scholarship. She was the only Black woman in her class. And again, she was super involved with the community there. Columbia's in New York. She was there during the Harlem Renaissance. And so she met poets like Langston Hughes and really got involved in that community. She even wrote a play with Langston Hughes that was lost for a really long time called Mulebone. In Hurston's writing, she downplays her time at Barnard, choosing instead to really emphasize her own accomplishments, her individuality as a writer. And I think, well, some people have said that that's her distancing herself from the Harlem Renaissance and from Black writers. I never think that was her intention. I think Hurston wanted to be a legend in her own right? She wanted to stand out. She wanted to be independent. And this was her way of doing that. She didn't want to be a product of a movement. She wanted to be a movement in and of itself. But there is no doubt that Hurston's time at Barnard and her interactions with these Harlem Renaissance writers had a really profound effect on her and on her writing style. Zora Neale Hurston was actually a pretty well-known author for her time, especially with her work in folklore. She was one of the first Black folklorists to ever publish a book on African folklore in the American South and in the Caribbean. And so she got a lot of respect from that during her life. People enjoyed her novels, although sometimes they criticized her for not being enough of an activist, for not talking enough about racism. Hurston spent a lot of her time exploring the folklore of the African diaspora. So that would be Black Americans in the South. And she also traveled to Haiti and visited Black Haitians there to record folklore traditions and just generally draw inspiration for her own writings. According to Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God was written in kind of an inspired frenzy over 7 weeks that she spent in Haiti. Because of her interest in folklore and language, Hurston wrote in a dialect of English known as African American Vernacular English. It was Hurston's way of creating something that she felt was more real to the experience of these people, right? Language and the way that we express ourselves is a symptom of our inner life. And Hurston felt she couldn't properly express the inner life without being true to the language. And so the dialects that she uses are actually a great record of the kind of language that was being used in the American South by Black Americans at that time. In her article on the subject, Sasha Ashton argues for the importance of reading African American vernacular English. In Hurston's writing, African American vernacular English is more than a way of speaking, more still than a feature of Blackness. It's the medium through which she tells her beautiful stories. You cannot separate the stories she tells or the lives she portrays from Blackness. The rhythm that Shakespeare broke and rearranged words to insert in his work intentionally occurs organically in Hurston's prose. I've always had a deep love for Black expression. I find deep comfort in the security of speaking to other Black people in a way only we truly understand. But before I read Their Eyes Were Watching God, it still felt like a love I had to keep private. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because the misuse I still witnessed daily made it abundantly clear that I was surrounded by people who didn't understand. People who saw it as the building blocks of jokes and not the building blocks of poetry. More than anything, that may be why Hurston's writing affects me and so many others the way it does. As a white woman, I know that my perspective is different from Ashton's. I don't have that same cultural connection to African American vernacular English, but I do have an appreciation of beautiful, meaningful language. And that is what Their Eyes Were Watching God offers to the observant reader. Near the end of Hurston's life, Hurston wrote that she was amazed by the Anglo-Saxons' lack of curiosity about the internal lives and emotions of the Negroes, and for that matter, any non-Anglo-Saxon within our borders above the class of unskilled labor. Hurston went on to complain about the American obsession, the Anglo-Saxon white obsession with types, and just their general inability to accept the inner lives of anyone who wasn't white. I think this frustration might be why Hurston wrote in the way that she did, why she was so concerned with the inner lives and fulfillment of Black characters and less concerned with these enormous social movements, right? The Jim Crow laws and the appeasement of Jim Crow laws and reintegration of races in schools. That is not a concern for her, even though it was really a concern for her time. I think the reason is because she was so concerned about getting that inner life through that she left out a lot of kind of these social movements that we think of as being important when we're talking about writing race. She wrote that the realization that Negroes are no better nor no worse, and at times just as boring as everybody else, will hardly kill off the population of the nation. She does try to express the true inner lives of those people. She tries to make them real and not just types. She's not trying to make stock characters. She's trying to create lives that are believable, that are real, and that we can imagine ourselves, even if we're reading about someone who's very different from us. Enough of an activist for not talking enough about racism, but she was largely forgotten by the end of her life. By the 1960s, most people didn't know who Hurston was. And so when she died, she was buried in an unmarked grave and forgotten about for about 10 years until another amazing writer, Alice Walker, who had been looking through these histories, rediscovered Hurston's work and felt like she had hit upon a gold mine. She was so excited that she created this revival of Hurston's work, and now she's being read in high school classrooms across the country. It's really cool to follow Hurston's journey because she has received that legendary status that she longed for in life. It makes her so captivating to read. I love Hurston because she forces me to look compassionately on lives that are not mine, lives that I can't otherwise understand. Thank you guys for watching this video. It's been fun to make, and I'm excited to do the follow-up where I talk about all of the themes and the symbols and the ways that we can continue to ponder on the book that we've read, right? This is how we get the most out of reading if we prepare beforehand, engage throughout, and then have some time for reflection at the end. So this is going to be really fun. I hope that this reading experience is rewarding for you, even if it's difficult at first for you to get a grasp of the African American vernacular English. Even if sometimes there are things that you don't understand, don't let that slow you down. Keep going and focus more on paying attention to those feelings, what these images might be trying to convey, and getting the big scope of the story. And we can dive deeper into specifics when we reach our video at the end of the book. Feel free to like, subscribe if you want updates when the next video comes out, and leave a comment if there's anything any questions you still have about Hurston's life after watching this video. I love to try to get through those, see if I can find answers, or let you know if there's not answers. There are still things that we're trying to learn about Hurston because she was forgotten for some. Thanks for watching, and happy reading.